Well, welcome everyone. I'm Mary Edmonds, and I work here at the Faber Institute along Father Ganz, who will be leading us through Narnia this evening. And my role, particularly this evening for this meeting, will just be to keep an eye on everyone, make sure that everyone feels connected enough. If you have any issues with Zoom or anything in particular, feel free to mention that over in the chats. I'll just be keeping an eye on that. And as there are discussion times coming up, as I mentioned, feel free to unmute yourself to join in the discussion, or you can do the raise your hand feature and I can help bring people in. So I'll kind of just be monitoring and keeping things going in that way. So glad you're all able to join us this evening for the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which for many people, that is the most known of the Narnia books by C.S. Lewis, or maybe a favorite. So this should be an interesting discussion this evening for sure. As I mentioned last time, my 7-year-old daughter and I are reading through these together as her bedtime stories. And that has been really fun to explore these stories, the adventure of it, kind of get her perspective as a first-time reader and as someone who's so young and often has a different perspective on such stories. So we're really enjoying that. I've also, as we've been going on walks this week before it got too rainy, I have found myself noticing lampposts around the neighborhood, which has just been an interesting thing that keeps coming to my attention as this book has been top of mind. Maybe there have been things for you if you're currently reading through that you're noticing or spotting in your everyday life just as you're exploring these books and thinking through them day to day. And hopefully, part of this discussion this evening brings some of that about as well. Different things that people might bring up or say, or a thought from Father Ganz might really marinate, work its way through you in the next few days and weeks. So thank you again for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Father Ganz, and we'll get going on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Good to have you here.
Well, Mary, thank you. I want to take a moment to exclaim because I see in one of the triangles, one of the rectangles, got to get my geometric forms correct because I want to reference someone who's really good at math. My sister Katie's husband, Bill, died and went among our ancestors a couple and a half years ago. But his brother is here on the screen, who is an elite fighter pilot, a commander of a wing of elite jets. And I always admired him so much. And it's just so great to see him. There he is, just looking thin and in shape as he always was. So thank you for letting me take a moment, you all, just to express my delight at seeing that he's alive and not a corpse. We hate corpses when they show up, even though it's October. So, Rich, nice to see you. Very nice to have you here. Today, on the Catholic liturgical calendar, we're celebrating the Feast of the Guardian Angels, reference to which there is evidence in Scripture of the presence of angels coming up. Most famously, we notice it every year at the time of the birth of Christ, when the shepherds in the fields, and suddenly the heavens are filled with the angelic host, exclaiming with joy and singing. The thought of the singing of the angels in heaven, that must be just so incredibly beautiful. And they were there, obviously, to keep an eye on the Christ child, as well as to announce. When I was little, I was taught that each of us has a guardian angel, and that's been the understanding, that we have a companion who walks with us. The most famous kind of suggestion of this is in the book of Tobit, where there's an archangel that walks in the story, and no one knows, my goodness, this isn't just an angel, it's an archangel. And like angels do, serving God, it was an angel that came to heal wrongs and bring unity where everyone thought only disaster could happen between two families. So it's a beautiful story like that. And when I was young, I was taught this prayer. So I'd like to just begin with that prayer, asking God to help us be aware that even though our vision is so limited, one of the striking things we notice about kids coming into Narnia is they're seeing things that can't possibly be true, like that animals actually can talk, or better, that they can communicate directly with humans and there's no barrier. Well, that can't be right. Where does that happen? Just because we can't see the angels and their presence and mission among us, we cannot let our arrogance and our ignorance cause us to imagine they just don't exist. It would be sort of like what parents of high school kids can feel when they're driving the kids in the carpool and they're talking even about the driver when he or she is right there. It's as if they don't even notice they're there. So here's a prayer that I invite you to pray with me if they seem like words that you could pray. It goes like this. Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love commits me here. Ever this day be at my side, to light and guard, to rule and guide. Amen. Now, if you like that prayer, I want you to know that if you liked it, it won't automatically make you a Catholic, so you're safe if you're not. Just need to tell you that. You can pray with all the love that you want to put into it. Welcome, everybody, to a chance to journey into Narnia through what maybe at times surprised Lewis was without question his most famous book. All he wrote, incredibly sophisticated scholarly works, very important, that it turned out to be this particular story. The Chronicles of Narnia, yes, but this particular story had an enormous impact on the world, and maybe on you. And I'm going to ask you about that in a moment. But first, I'd like to begin where C.S. Lewis began, in a letter to a little girl named Lucy, who was the son of one of Lewis's most important friends. Roger Lancelin Green was, he called, his first great friend, and Owen Barfield, the first and last of the Inklings. He was first in the sense first in, and he was last in the sense he lived to be 99 years old before he left us. So he's called the first and the last of the Inklings, those close conversational friends with C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, Barfield, and the others. About him, Lewis would write in Surprised by Joy, that autobiographical book, that he was writing at the same time he was writing The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So it's very interesting to hear him trying to put together the story of his life. At the same time, he's telling the story of Aslan, the great lion, in the world he created and over which he rules. About Owen Barfield, Lewis said, "We shared interests, but not points of view." Lewis described Barfield as his anti-self, the man who disagrees with you about everything. I love that they could be forever friends, deeply capable of learning from each other and acknowledging the deep excellence each were pursuing, even though their points of view were utterly contrary to each other. That says something important about love's ability to achieve a unity that even our best thinking will deny us. Another comment was by Owen Barfield, who spoke in an interview after the death of C.S. Lewis, in an interview in the United States, when asked, because Owen was one of Lewis's closest 40-year friends, he would say this, quote, "Now, whatever he was, and as you know, he, Lewis, was a great many things. C.S. Lewis was for me, first and foremost, the absolutely unforgettable friend. The friend with whom I was in close touch for over 40 years. The friend you might come to regard hardly as another human being, but almost as part of the furniture of my existence." Isn't that something? A friendship inside of whom you find your home. He had a daughter named Lucy, and Lewis was her godfather at her baptism. And at the beginning of The Lion, Witch, and the Robo, if you're one of those people who look at every page and make sure you don't miss every page, way before the book starts, there's this: "My dear Lucy," a letter he wrote to her, "I wrote this story for you. But when I began it, I had not realized that girls grow quicker than books. As a result, you are already too old for fairy tales. And by the time it is printed and bound, you will be older still. But someday, you will be old enough to start reading fairy tales again. You can then take it down from some upper shelf, dust it, and tell me what you think of it. I shall probably be too deaf to hear and too old to understand a word you say. But I shall still be your affectionate godfather." C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis began to write this book probably at the beginning of World War II. Not the beginning of World War II, but the beginning of Britain's involvement in World War II on the 3rd of September, 1939, when Britain declared war on Germany, Nazi Germany. And when that declaration took place, because of the threats that had come from across the water from Germany, and Hitler saying, "I will bomb your country out of existence," the children in London were sent to the countryside to protect them. And so there came a group of children, and they changed and grew to a number we don't know. Someone knows, I don't know how many, to the Kilns, which was the home of C.S. Lewis all his life with his brother Warnie on the outskirts of Oxford. It's about 7 miles, I think, away from the center of Oxford. And it was during this time, with the kids in the house and their reaction to the war and how they were, that we believe that's when he first started putting his thoughts down. And he came up with 4 children. That's how many he wanted. But they had very different names except for Peter. That was the only name that was the same. I'd like to ask you, in order to help us find out who's here, begin to get help from each other in understanding what's going on in this great story, My question to you is, whose story is it? And I'll let Mary kind of bring us in. And I'd like to acknowledge, as I usually do, that the first person who speaks will kind of stumble around. Shirley did that last time for us, was boldly the first to speak. And of course, she sounds really thin and superficial, and we're all so sorry for her. But the person who speaks first is the one who really helps us then deepen. Each successive person tends to deepen and gain speed because that's how the Holy Spirit works. So, Mary, just
Yeah,
my
I think
question.
we already have our first volunteer, the other Mary, my neighbor Mary. Go ahead.
What is this story? Whose story is it?
Well, I think that they're all right answers, but the first answer to kick us off is that the story is the story of Edmund, because he has such a redemption arc through the story and shows the biggest character growth. And we also see things from only his point of view, things that only happen to him. So that's the first answer to get us started.
See, Mary was a student of mine and she was brilliant then and still is. So I'm happy to see. Thank you, Mary. What a great insight, especially that piece that you add that there are parts of the story that we only have through him. And it's interesting to us that the part of the story that we most want to have from him, because only he could share it, is what he and Aslan talked about at the end. How we would have loved to have heard that. How, in the similar way, we would have loved to actually have heard the 40 days, which means a long and sufficient time after Jesus was resurrected. What did he talk about? What did he feel? What did he see? Did he tell different stories? Did he correct certain things he'd said earlier? Deepen them. Anyway, thank you, Mary. Anyone else? Whose story is it? Mary, you call him in.
Okay, Carol. And make sure you unmute first.
I really thought it was Lucy's story because she encounters magic or faith for the very first time. And this is something that, accompanies her through the adventures that she has in these books. She's the first one to meet Aslan. So I always thought it was Lucy's story, but it was real interesting about Edmund too. I mean, because he was the lost sheep that came back.
You know what's neat about that, Carol, is what Mary said and then what you said is a little bit like the experience of the apostles at Pentecost, where they heard the disciples speaking and everyone thought that the disciples were speaking directly to them. I've had teachers like that, extremely rare. When I sat in a classroom in a setting, and I swear to God, that teacher was talking directly to me. Of course he wasn't, but the Spirit was in him in such a way that many of us felt that. And so that you would say, well, it's Edmund's story. And you would say, no, it's Lucy's story. As Mary said at the beginning, they can be right in the way the Holy Spirit works. Anyway, thank you. Anyone else, Mary, that you want to bring in?
Yeah, Shannon, go ahead and unmute.
I'm going to go in a bit of a different direction and say that it's Coraline's story, because a story is not a story unless there's a beholder waiting to hear it. And I think for each of us, we might remember the first time that we heard this story and the impact it had on us. And I hope that for Cora that the story's for her.
Great comment. And that captures the name of this series, Here and There, which is a line when two of the children realize they can never return to Narnia because they've become too old for it. And they say, "Oh, Aslan, you mean we can never see you again?" And he goes, "Ah, no, not here, but there in your world you will know me by another name." And so, Shannon, you crossed over and took us from Narnia back into our world, where a child like Cora Lynn Edmonds, reading the story with her mom for the first time, believes from the bottom of her heart, so we might imagine, that the story is about her.
Thanks, Shannon. Amira, go ahead and unmute.
I can do it. I do this all day long. Oh, hey, everyone. Father Ganz, when you asked that question, the first thing that came to my mind was it depends, because I'm a good lawyer, but in many ways I'm sincere in that response, because every time I've read that book, the story was about someone different. And crossing from real life to the characters, sometimes it feels like what we were missing at the end of The Magician's Nephew and what happened to Jadis or just The Magician's Nephew. And then, you get into it in Lucy's perspective, and then Peter and his, even something as gruesome as his first kill. And the book just takes you in so many directions, and it could be all in one sitting that you experience all their stories, or it could be, whatever perspective from where your heart was when you picked it up that day, and kind of honing in on someone. So it's just something I was thinking about even yesterday when I was binge reading it all in one day.
Thank you, Amira. Boy, isn't that? It's why C.S. Lewis said the reader, I mentioned this before, that the true reader is not someone who reads a lot of books. The true reader is one who rereads good books over and over and over again. Because each time you read them, you're different. And because you're different, you see different things. There is a living connection there that Shannon's comment suggested with little Cora Lynn. That even her, starting, she's just almost in high school now, for heaven's sakes, that there she is, and she's reading it now for the first time. And someday when she has 8 beautiful little children and she's reading them this story, she'll see in their eyes they're all getting different things out of it. It's one of the great things about great stories. I think it's interesting. I want to make a transition here, and thank you for helping us kind of get into the sound of who we are as we interact with the story. I'd like to acknowledge that last time we did speak about it, and Shannon picked it up in her comment, that when I asked you about The Magician's Nephew, I asked you, what does this story mean? And we explored that a little bit. And ultimately I said to you, because it's true, that what the story means is what happens to you when you read it. That is the most important meaning. Strangely, it's not what C.S. Lewis intended, because a writer under the power of a great spirit will write more than he knows or more than she knows. And it will only be his or her readers who will discover things in what they wrote that they didn't know was there until the reader received it and told them about it. I think it's interesting that none of you said that this story belongs to Aslan. In the writing, it's the first time we meet him. I tucked the magician's nephew in first because it allows us to understand what the wardrobe is and was. But the magician's nephew actually was the book that was hardest for Lewis to write because he felt it demanded the most maturity for him to get it right. And actually, he'd written all of the Chronicles, and the magician's nephew, he was still struggling to finish it when he finished the last battle. Isn't that interesting? Sometimes it takes a long time to figure out where you're actually from and why. Which is what the magician's nephew is about. The founding of the world and Aslan's unique purpose that he poured into all things through the beautiful song that he sang, that was joined in by the stars, filling the earth with life and imbued with beautiful music. It's interesting, but it's also something very cool about God's own character. The humility of God that would have you notice other people, other things more than him. Without question, it's got to be about Aslan. It's his introduction. One time, in an essay that Lewis wrote, because he and Tolkien in particular did a lot of writing about fairy tales and stories and how they work. He called and identified something in great stories that he calls the kappa element. That K sound in Greek, the first letter of a Greek word that means to hide or to be hidden. That in every great story, there's a kappa element, which he identifies in this essay. What is it? Let me give an example. Years ago, I think in high school, I read a book by Willa Cather called Death Comes for the Archbishop. If you haven't read it, you're not only a loser, but I don't like you and never want to talk to you ever again. It is an incredibly beautiful novel. But if you were to ask me what it's about, I could not tell you a single thing what it's about. What I remember was the atmosphere that her beautiful writing created. It was a feeling so powerful of gentleness and goodness. And if you could feel light, not just see it, I think I felt what divine light feels like. I remember nothing but its atmosphere. Another book, The Grapes of Wrath, we were required to read it when we came into our freshman year of high school at Gonzaga Prep. Once I started reading it, I thought, well, someone wanted to practice wrath against my happiness because I didn't like it at all, even though he's one of the great novelists of American history. Why? Because his description of the Dust Bowl created an atmosphere that I found so suffocating that I just found it too uncomfortable to even read it. I didn't like going there. And it was the magnificence of his craft. Those two examples, that's the kappa element Lewis is saying. A story needs to create an atmosphere that is all around the story, but it never explicitly adverts to itself. It's saying, now I'm being silent, or now I'm being lovely. It's just you're picking it up in the story. It's a smell. It's a whole thing you breathe in. It's what makes great stories so memorable and makes you want to go back. I want to feel that again. That's a real part of real art in real storytelling. And great storytellers bring you in, not just to the words, and this happened after this, and this happened after this. They create an atmosphere that invites you to dwell in it. I, a churchman my entire life, was deeply concerned most of my life that I wasn't picking up the kappa element in church. I didn't feel like I was in heaven or that Aslan was on the move. What I'm describing, I'm not giving a critique. I'm saying the kappa element and the atmosphere that's created is a crucial part of the story. And for Lewis, because of the great work of a scholar that's working now, whom I met when I was giving a talk in Oxford, Professor Michael Ward wrote a book exploring this aspect of the Chronicles of Narnia. And he adverts to a poem that C.S. Lewis wrote called The Planets, somewhere between 1939 and 1944. I think that's right. It was written sometime in there. No, I'm not going to go there. I wish I could, but no. My question to you is this. When do we first meet Aslan in this story? Anyone?
Yeah, Katie.
Well, to me, when we first met Aslan was when the beavers brought him up and the children heard his voice and had this reaction to it that caused some of them to feel amazing, tingling, etc., and one to feel a sense of fear or horror. That was, to me, when I first met Aslan.
Isn't that interesting what she just said? The first time the children meet Aslan is through the report of someone else, Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. But you said that was the first time you met Aslan. Isn't that interesting? Actually, this is the way it works in the Christian dispensation. It's we and how we talk about God, which will be the first time or not that many people will actually hear the sound, the voice, and say, I met God tonight at dinner. But Aslan wasn't actually there. And yet you're saying, but he actually was. Through the faith and belief of Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. And not only in their faith, but as you, Katie, point out very well, and it comes up all the way through the story, Lewis will often say they had a curious feeling. That's the word he'll use, which means it felt important. It was the sense of the holy that they were experiencing, and they felt it and reacted to it in different ways. For Edmund at that time, still under the power of the White Witch, he hated it. Peter, it made him feel brave, like he could go out and strangle a wolf by his bare hands. Aslan was present for us to meet him, not only in Mr. and Mrs. Beaver, but in the effect and the presence of Aslan in each of the children as they reacted. And each of us have had reactions to Aslan that are full of fear, sometimes resentment, sometimes longing, sometimes courage and bravery. We have all of those reactions. But you can't have a reaction without an action, which means even in our reactions, Aslan has appeared. But how fascinating, he hasn't appeared. It's Aslan's on the move. Isn't that interesting? Anyone else? When do we actually first see Aslan? I'm not disagreeing with what Katie said, not at all. I'm just saying, when it's always saying, he's coming, he's on the move. When does he actually appear for the children to see him for the first time?
Peter. Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Well, I must admit that I cheated and also watched the Disney version of the movie.
Okay.
But I remember the tent scene and him coming out of the tent. And it kind of reminded me of, Moses coming out of the tent. Sort of a tent is sort of a biblical symbol. And that's where I recall the children. I could be wrong from the movies may have taken some. But that was an impactful moment, him coming out of the tent.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me take you here. I'm going to go share a screen here if I can pull this off. Can you all see what I'm looking at, the map of Narnia? Okay. So walk with me through it. Just let's get the geography here. So all the way over here on the left, do you see my cursor there? On the left, that is the Western Woods. And you can see that little thing is the wardrobe. There's the lamppost. Directly north is the cave of Mr. Tumnus in the Lantern Waste to the north. You see directly east is the witch's castle. So if we come back down here to the lamppost, it gives you an idea of where Mr. Beaver met the children as they wandered in the Western Woods and hushed them up and took them dark and warned them that there were watchers. The witches' watchers were looking for them everywhere. So they hiddenly moved through the long forest to get there to the Beaver's Dam, the home of Mr. and Mrs. Beaver, where they had scones and fresh honey. And then after dinner, finally got to hear about Aslan and discovered that Edmund was gone, who was told that up between those two mountain peaks you see there, in between is the witch's castle at the headwaters of that other stream that comes down and joins the great river. Follow me here? So there's the Beaver's Dam. Then they began one heck of a long trek. I don't know what the mileage is because we're not told that, but we get an impression it's a heck of a long way because undercover, they are trying to get to the stone table, which is all the way to the east, all the way there. Do you see the stone table there? Do you see me circling there? Right there. That's the stone table, at the side of which, on the side of which, is the pavilion of Aslan. And that's where the children first see Aslan, sitting among all the animals with 2 leopards as his special guards on either side, one holding the standard and one holding the crown, or whatever it was. They're the special ones. But all the friends of Aslan, the animal friends, are standing around him. So they see him from a distance in his kingly presence in the middle of the animal kingdom that we know from the magician's nephew. Each one he called out with a special song and made them live. And then at the end, in a completely different, wilder song in Magician's Nephew, he gives them speech and he says, love, speak, act, or whatever he gives all of the animals the powers to speak. Anyway, there's the stone table there, and you can see that when Aslan took Peter to the stone table and looked from a height, he could see Cair Paravel down there by the sea. That's what they were looking at. Okay? Just wanted to take a moment to just square ourselves away with the map here. Let me stop the share and come back here. I want to take a moment to ask you, what is the wardrobe? So we've taken a moment to just start to get a feel for Aslan, who is really first introduced in this story because it is the first story he wrote. We'll learn about who the witch is, what kind of creature she is. We saw her in The Magician's Nephew as the Queen of Charn, whose greatest power, because when people are truly broken inside and terribly lost inside, finally the only power they claim, and it really jazzes them up and makes them feel so powerful, is they can say, I have the power to destroy things that you've built. In The Magician's Nephew, it's called the deplorable word. No power to build, to make, to create. All of those are gifts of light. When you become so dark, it jazzes you and makes you feel powerful to say, I have the power to destroy things you care about. So fear me. That's Queen Jadis that we met in The Magician's Nephew, and we'll meet her in a different guise here. And you'll see a frightening aspect of that spirit loose in the world. Tell me about the wardrobe. You've read the story. Everyone knows about this wardrobe, I swear. What is the wardrobe? Where did it come from? I think Cora Lynn might have
Okay, I have a hand directly in my face. Go ahead,
Okay.
Cora.
The tree.
What tree? You're right. It's the wood of a famous tree. Do you remember what tree it is?
The apple tree.
Yes, it's an apple tree. Do you remember where that tree is?
From the last book.
It was from the last book.
Remember where
It was grown from an apple that was plucked from the great tree of protection that stood very near the lamppost in the Lantern Waste. And that's planted there by Diggory, who's sent by Aslan to go to the great garden in the west. It was a test of him. Can you repair the disobedience with an act of obedience when you in the garden will meet the great tempter who will try to make you fall again? Can you this time trust me and bring, not eat the apple, but get an apple from that tree and bring it back to me? And so he brings it back. And little Cora Lynn, do you remember where that apple will go?
Well, the apple came back with Diggory and he gave it to his mom.
he asked Aslan if he could take it back, and Aslan said that was okay. So he brings it back to his mom, and his mom, who has been steadily dying, is healed by eating slices of the apple that Diggory was so kind to slice up so that she could eat it. And then the core of that apple he planted in the garden of their house, at Diggory's house, at the magician's nephew's house. And it grows up to be a great tree. And as Cora Lynn has told us, from that wood, the wardrobe was built. Direct connection to Narnia. Thank you, Cora Lynn. Anyone else? Any comments about the wardrobe? How does it strike you? What does it do to you when you think of it?
I've got a comment, Father Rick. I think if we remember correctly, Jadis told Diggory to steal an apple, and he had the great moral challenge of whether he would do what Aslan told him to do, or whether he would be selfishly trying to fix it himself. And he ends up trusting in Aslan when it makes no sense to trust in him. And it's only because of that trust and faith that things work out the way they do.
Kimball, beautiful. So it brings that as a direct undercutting of magic. The world's greatest magic comes from our relationship with Aslan, with God. Then anything can become a mechanism of grace and healing. Anything. These are not magic apples, which is what Jadis imagines them to be. They're apples that are freely given by Aslan to Narnia, which, if taken and used as Aslan requests, can become a vehicle of great power. And so it becomes a religious act. It's not magic. Great comment, Kimball. Thank you. I wonder if it would help you to know that what a wardrobe is. So the first thing that strikes one who reads English is that to ward means to guard, to ward off evil spirits. What is a wardrobe then? Well, in English history, it's frequently with a capital W, and it's an office or department of the royal household responsible for supplying and maintaining the royal clothes, armor, furnishings, things like if you happen to have a Holy Grail hanging around, you put that in the wardrobe, and other valuable goods and objects belonging to the monarch or relating to the running of the royal household. And that was a high office to be entrusted with that. You were called the master of the great wardrobe, or the yeoman of the wardrobe. It was an important office. Why do I mention this to you? Because the wardrobe is already a crossing point of Narnia. Because who are the precious objects in the wardrobe? The children. They are owned. They belong to and are guarded by the monarch, whose most precious possessions they are. Isn't that cool? The wardrobe. I'd like to suggest to you, as a way of coming at the wardrobe, is to come at it from a quite different way for a moment. I'd like to appeal to you in two ways about the wardrobe. We think a wardrobe is a storage place of a finite dimension. Sometimes you have a closet in your bedroom. Sometimes you have that huge thing that people call a walk-in closet, much bigger. But it has a finite dimension. It never occurs to us that a wardrobe, as it didn't occur to Lucy and then the children, they couldn't believe it, was actually a crossing place into another world. Or was it? Yes, it's a threshold place. It's a liminal, a crossing over place. But it asks you and me as the reader to consider who's crossing. Which way does this work? Or which is the real world? What is it a threshold to? What do you think?
Rick, it's so interesting to me because we're studying the Acts of the Apostles in the gospel, and I keep getting the narrow gate of faith, which in a sense, the wardrobe is this portal to, to God, this place. This is just really interesting. I mean, the children were the prophesied ones, to Narnia. These human kids would come in, and that would mean that Aslan would come and make everything better and, redeem Narnia. Anyway.
Thank you, Carol.
So many images.
So I want to just slow you down just for a second. Thank you for that. Let's just slow down a little bit. So is it to a place? Well, yeah, it's Narnia. We saw the map. But is the place the most important part of what you cross into?
No.
It really is very interesting how you're entering an entirely different and much richer experience of what it means to be a child, what it feels like to be related to all the things that adults say can't possibly be true or real. And suddenly here they are. We haven't.
Isn't it really a crossing over into a new perspective, into a new way of looking at the world, but at things they have looked at before, but seeing possibilities, seeing things in a different way, seeing relationships in a different way, seeing people in a different way, promises, honesty, but it's really much more a new perspective, it seems to me, than a new place.
Thank you.
Can it also be they're crossing over to a relationship, a relationship with Jesus, a relationship with Aslan, with each other in a whole new dimension?
And discovering in the process, yes, and discovering in the process that Peter is a king, and he's Peter the Magnificent with a sword and is brave and can kill the most fearsome wolf in all of Narnia in his first battle, for heaven's sakes. And it's Susan the Gentle who has gifts. No, she has tools, not gifts, from Father Christmas. And Lucy the Valiant. She never knew she was, but suddenly she is. because of the relationships that get established. And do you notice that this new perspective that you refer to, it includes the natural world? Unlike the relentless egoism of human beings who imagine we're the most important thing. And there, in that world, as important are Mr. and Mrs. Beaver and their dignity and their beautiful house. And even when the witch and her lieutenants are coming to kill them all, Mrs. Beaver's saying, now, slow down. We need to have our basket with our biscuits. Hurry up, can't we? No one's going. Evil is going to make me change the good way I run my household. These are beavers. These aren't human beings. Aslan is a lion, for heaven's sakes. The animal world. This is something that sounds strong in people like Pope Francis. Through Laudato Si, we've lost our connection to the natural world that has such a capacity to heal us and remind us of the Creator who sustains us, even as we humans can make such a mess of things. Not cynically put, practically, insightfully put. We need the trees to remind us how to be still. And the animals, even little mice, who in a crisis know exactly where to put their teeth and set free the one that will free everyone. The mice, for heaven's sakes.
Well, it's like what Jesus did is he used organic elements to perform miracles often, fire, water, mud.
Yeah.
Really interesting, Rick.
Yeah.
The artistry of Lewis taking us through this small wooden wardrobe into a new transcendent world at the front end of Narnia. And then we go to the last battle and we move through this small shack into a new and transcendent different world, exiting Narnia, farther up and farther in.
Yes.
It's a wonderful artistry.
Thank you, Kimball, even though you wrecked the whole Chronicles, because now everyone knows the end and they won't want to read it and they'll start binge watching Friends all over again. Thanks, Kimball. No, great comment. Anyway, let's take a pause because it's at 7 o'clock and I'll turn it over to Mary to tell us what we might do with this pause.
Yeah, so we'll just take a few minutes. Let's say we'll come back at 7:08, 7:01 right now, just to get up, refill your glass, warm up your food, stretch your legs, or hang out. And we'll be here to chat. But we'll come back at 7:08. I'll call everyone back in. All right.
Thank you, Mary.
Everyone, we'll get back going for this last little bit of The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. So feel free to turn your screens back on and we'll start up again.
Welcome back, everybody. There are so many different ways we can come at this story that it almost leaves me with too many choices. So I only pick and choose certain things in the hopes that it will activate whatever this story is doing in you already or will do when you read them. It's not to retell the story. It's not try to indicate that my thoughts are the more important ones. They're simply reflections that I hope with the Spirit will activate you so that you can be like Sue, Mama Sue just said, so that you can feel called deeper into the story. I'd like to take us to the chapter where it's chapter 14 and it's called The Triumph of the Witch. You remember the story, and I'll just be brief. If you haven't read it, you'll have a chance. It's a moment where Jadis, the queen of Narnia, as she imagines herself to be, and as long as she's able to convince everybody that she is the queen, because I am, and is scary enough that she can scare them, she doesn't have to show her credentials. Who made you queen? Who crowned you? She's a fraud, but incredibly powerful and dangerous because she doesn't have a soul. So she can't possibly relate to people. She can only manipulate them. That's the inner, intense, vast loneliness of the evil spirit. It has no capacity for relationship. So it's full of treachery, that kind of personality. And we see her treachery in trying to use little kids to get at the one she really hates, which is Aslan. This is her moment where she's going to win. And she's going to win big. And you need to be able to see this from the perspective of Lucy and Susan, who are back in the woods watching the complete, absolute, sweep the table victory of Queen Jadis and her lieutenants. They absolutely, completely win. They humiliate Aslan. They shave him. They mock him. And finally, with her whispering in his ear, you thought that this was going to save Edmund. But it won't, because I'll kill him too, and everyone else. There's the treachery. In the same way, this is how we are meant to understand what Holy Saturday is in our world, where we know Aslan by another name. The only way Holy Saturday works, the mystery of Holy Saturday, is we have to experience, we're invited to enter the experience of the disciples, however awkwardly, ignorantly, poorly they followed Jesus. They loved him and believed in him. And no one ever spoke like him. No one had a voice like him. No one could teach like him. No one had such beautiful power to bring people lost back. In order to understand Holy Saturday in our world, we are given in this chapter to understand when the bad guys win everything, an absolute, utter victory. Because if we don't allow ourselves to go there, like we try to do on Holy Saturday in our world, and really realize the world won. They killed the Savior. And they got us to yell, "Kill him! Crucify him!" We all shouted. We all lost. The evil spirit completely wins. I wanted to take you there and have you consider perhaps more deeply the significance of this chapter. In order to appreciate the absolutely unexpected magnificence of a resurrection, how completely impossible that could be. The startling, unexpected overturning of an absolute victory in Narnia by Queen Jadis. She won. What did you feel when you, with Susan and Lucy, feeling the absolutely dismantling of your hope as you watched from the bushes? The humiliation of this magnificent gift of a lion. And the coldness of the night and the utter silence. And then suddenly in the east, it's a little brighter than it was a moment ago. And suddenly in the east, the disk of the sun coming up over there where Cair Paravel, the castle, sits by the sea. In the east, the sun. And suddenly hearing in the dark where silence was, an enormous crack as the stone table is torn right down the middle. In our world, we talk about the tearing of the veil in the temple, which was the separation between the holy world of God, the other world, and our world. It was architecturally articulating that these are two worlds. And in the tearing of the veil in our world, in the great temple of Jerusalem, there is no longer God's world and our world, the secular world and the sacred world. That division is now broken. By being united, there is no such thing as a merely natural world anymore. The world we live in is supernaturally charged, like Narnia is, with that originating sound of Aslan's song singing through all things. In that chapter, in order to get it, we have to feel the Holy Saturday mystery. Why? Because I have noticed, and maybe sometimes you do, it might be even in you, that people are being tempted by a kind of despair around certain things they're noticing, a kind of hopelessness, feeling helpless. Notice the closeness between helpless and hopeless. Their sound is similar. It can feel, doesn't mean it's true, it can feel like chapter 14 of The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, where the darkness is starting to sweep the table. What will we do when we feel those feelings? Will we be surprised to find in the center of that experience Aslan, wounded and sorrowing, who, interestingly, is not able to be sure that he won't be completely destroyed. Remember, he told the kids, I don't know how this is going to turn out. Aslan himself, as great as he is, serves the great emperor beyond the sea. Aslan himself stands under one who is greater than he. He doesn't know. But he goes with Narnia into their darkest brokenness. And then the great emperor beyond the sea acts. We've got to get 14 before we can get 15 and feel it like those kids did, is what I'm trying to invite us to consider as you read that. And wonder, when you or I feel creeping into our consciousness temptations to feel helpless, caught in feelings that unsettle us, what will we do with those temptations against the great emperor beyond the sea? What is your favorite aspect of Aslan the Great Lion? What part of Aslan do you love the most? I'm asking, and Mary, if you would be attentive, if someone would be willing.
Go ahead, Rich.
Okay. I like the way that Lewis describes the combination of fear and awe that the children feel when they first encounter Aslan, and as they hear about him, how it's both fearsome and comforting. I find that very interesting and very comforting to use the same word.
So that wonderful expression, if those kids had ever imagined that someone could not be good and terrible at the same time, then they were certainly at that moment disabused of that. That beautiful combination of when they first saw him. But there are different aspects of the contemplation of Aslan that different people pick up and love. And I'm asking you, what is it, like you just said, there was a quality, that was that kappa element. It's the atmosphere that Aslan creates, good and terrible, that for you, Rich, incites your admiration, or I think that's what I saw in your face and heard in your voice. Anyone else?
I was impressed the element of calm. It kind of projected from Magician's Nephew over onto the wardrobe with the kids, a calmness. That was my impression.
Yeah. And it's a calmness in Aslan that you notice. But I sensed that you felt calmer because of his calmness. There's something that came off him that affected you, is what it sounded like when you spoke that way. Do you remember the two girls, what they always wanted? Go ahead, Katie.
Katie.
I was going to say it was the touch, the feel, the scent, that special scent that he had. It was, like the girls burying his hands in his fur. He was so real in a very physical way.
Yes.
I agree. I thought the eyes, his golden eyes and his mane were really attractive to me. It was in a visceral sense.
Yes.
I was really moved when Aslan was walking to the stone table and noticed Susan and Lucy and invited them to accompany him. And he was so tender, and it's like he needed them to hold him or touch him and be with him. And that vulnerable side of him, that he needed something and wasn't afraid to ask for it, instead of sending them away or telling them it wasn't safe for them to be there. It just really touched me very deeply.
Yeah. Thank you.
I just wanted to, since Pete doesn't have his sound, just wanted to read what he said in the chat. that he, quote, he is not safe, but he is good.
That famous line from Mr. Beaver. Of course, dear, he's not safe. But Aslan is good. Yeah. Isn't it remarkable that you and I can pick up such, what are the words? The closest word I can get to the overall experience of him. Doesn't mean it's for you, but we have to find the words.
It's hard.
For me, the word is majesty. The majesty of Aslan. And it makes us wonder, how is it possible that people like the witch and all her confederates, how is it that that's not how they react to Aslan? How is it that he's a threat and a terror, and he makes them shake in their hooves when he comes near? How can someone so beautiful and sweet and powerful and magnificent and generous and always courteous be so completely misseen, misunderstood? Do you remember that Queen Jadis, her comment, which she says several times, is she calls Aslan a fool when he comes to the stone table when she's waiting for him. And her first comment, you fool. And I'd like to take a moment just playfully as we finish up to just offer 3 observations playfully. What a dumb way of finishing, but I can't help it. 3 ways of insulting people. You can call someone dumb, you can call someone stupid, and you can call someone foolish. If you call someone dumb, technically speaking, you're saying they aren't paying attention to what's right in front of them to experience. It's an insult leveled at their inability to use their 5 senses to pick up what's right there. They're just dumb. If you call someone stupid, you're starting to cut closer. It starts to hurt more if someone calls you stupid. Stupid means it's an insult that references your unwillingness to use your mind, to use your intellect, to fight to understand what's true, to weigh evidence carefully, and to be slow to follow opinion. Usually what stupid means is a move from experience of the senses, the sound of a word or a slogan, and you immediately go to feeling, reactive feeling, skipping thinking. The White Witch does not call Aslan dumb or stupid. She says he's foolish. And foolish is an insult that cuts deeper because it means you have poor judgment. It means you have no ability to conclude to what the truth of something is. You don't know how to get to a judgment of truth. So what we hear in her insult, said multiple times to Aslan at this moment of his killing, is the world you see is not the real world. The world I, the queen, see is the real world. And you are a fool because you think the world is another world. Sometimes insults can help us understand what's actually going on. Give me a moment. Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love commits me here, ever this day be at my side, to light and guard, to rule and guide. Amen. Back to you, Mary.
Thank you, Father Ganz. And thank you all for not only joining, but for such a wonderful, vibrant conversation with lots of thoughts and insights that I hope that we all take with us even as we leave here. Thank you. Just a couple upcoming gatherings that we'll be having in this month now that we're in October. Not this Saturday, but the next Saturday, October 14th, we're having one of our regular habits, which is a pilgrim's retreat. It's a day-long retreat here in Portland for those of you who are local. And there's information about that on our website, but it will be here at West Hills Covenant Church, and you're all invited to that. And then the following week, on Tuesday the 17th, we'll continue our night school class. And you might have noted that for this series of the night school, we're going to spend 2 months on one guest. And so this past month, we started on the topic of Teilhard de Chardin, and we will continue that conversation through the night school in this month of October. It was a wonderful class. You didn't have to be present for that first one to join the second. And you can also listen to recordings of anything that you've missed, such as that class. But we invite you to that as well. I'll send a follow-up email tomorrow with information on the recording of this class in case there's something you wanted to revisit, and possibly some resources that Father Ganz will have to pass along. But so glad to have you all here with us, even there in your own homes. Feel free to unmute and say goodbye as you leave, and we hope to see you next month when we discuss Father Ganz' Prince Caspian. Is that correct? I believe it is.
Yep.
So good to have you. Unmute and say goodbye. We'll see you soon.
So nice to have you all.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, Rick. Good night, Katie.
Father Ganz.
Good night.
Good night, and thank
night,
you.
Father
Thanks
Ganz.
to everyone.
Good night.
It's
Good
like
night.
like Walton's Mountain. Good night, boy.